Work calls out to us. Work has measurable achievement. You hit a goal, you get a bonus. You hit this number, you get to take home this much. Whatever. You get awards if you're in sales. Let's face it, at home, that just doesn't happen. You know, at work, you're making decisions, you're leading things, and you come home, and you know you're cleaning up your child's throw up at night, or your dog's pooped in the yard, and you got to clean it up, and it's like it just changes, and you don't get the same gratification. I think that's part of the reason. And you're also trying to keep a business afloat.
Welcome to FCCI's Pathway to Purpose podcast, a program dedicated to equipping Christian business leaders with the tools, the insights, and the inspiration to lead their companies for Christ. I'm your host, Ken Powell, and today's episode takes us on a deeply personal journey of faith, resilience, and transformation. Imagine sitting alone in a bare apartment at the lowest point in your life, questioning everything you've worked for. That's where our story begins, a powerful testimony of how Joel Manby turned his pain into purpose and rediscovered what truly matters. Through heartbreak, hard decisions, and unwavering faith, he learned the importance of balancing ambition with family and living a life aligned with God's calling. So stay tuned as we explore lessons on navigating challenges, choosing faith over fear, and building a legacy rooted in love and service. Whether you're a seasoned leader or just starting your journey, this episode promises wisdom you can apply to your path. Let's dive in as Joel Manby, former CEO of Herschend Enterprises, provides timeless wisdom for your leadership journey.
I want to take you to a point in my life that was the lowest point that I've ever had in my 52 years. And I was sitting in an apartment, a single room apartment in Northern California. And the apartment had absolutely nothing on the walls. It was bare. There wasn't even a fake green plant to spice up the joint at all. And I was in a lot of pain, and I had a nice bottle of wine there, trying to take the edge off the pain. And I had worked my whole life like crazy, and my career had been a complete treadmill. But I had come to the lowest point at a moment when I shouldn't be in that situation. In a nutshell, how I got to that point is I got out of graduate school, got an MBA from Harvard, a really good school, got on a fast track at General Motors. And my wife, who's Marky, raise your hand, Marky. She does not like attention, but she's a big part of this. And at the end, we'll open it up. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A. And I do want you to ask questions if we can be helpful to you in your journey through these issues. But we moved... Oops, that's my advancement mechanism. We moved 10 times. Thank you. We moved 10 times in 15 years, all over the country, mostly in Michigan, but also out east to get my MBA and so forth. And we kept progressing up, taking more and more responsibility. And I was part of the Saturn startup, which was literally 20 hours a day. It was an incredible startup situation. If you remember how well Saturn started, the first 10 years were a miraculous launch. Then I went, because of the success of Saturn, at only 36, was promoted to run Saab North America, which was a complete turnaround situation. They were losing money. They had really fallen on rough times. We made a ton of difficult decisions, again, 24/7 kind of work, and things started to turn around there. But all this time, Marky and our 3 girls at the time were carrying the load at home. And I kept telling them I loved them. I kept telling them they were number one to me. But my actions were not showing that or proving that. And then, because of the success that Saab North America had, we had one of those classic corporate reorganizations where they eliminated my peers in Asia and Europe, and they gave me responsibility for Asia, but not for Europe. So I had North America and Asia, and that took me overseas for a couple weeks at a time. And in 1999, I literally traveled about 270 days that year. I was gone about 80% of the weeknights. And one night, it was September 13th of 1999, I called home from Japan. I was at the Tokyo Auto Show, and Marky was on the other end of the line, and she was having a hard time talking, which was not like Marky. She's usually very jovial, but her voice started to crack, and she said, "You know, this is the second year in a row you've been away on my birthday." And I knew that, but it hit me. You know, I should be home. And she said, "This is just not working for me. This is not what we signed up for. You are never home, and when you are home, you're not home." And she was right, because with the time differences, I'd have 6 a.m. phone calls with Sweden because my boss was the worldwide president. Then we'd have 11 p.m. phone calls with Asia, and I was just always on. And she said, "Something really needs to change. The kids don't know you. You don't know who their teachers are." And I knew she was right. And I tried to do what I thought was the right thing. I actually went back to the Saab worldwide president, asked him if he would take away the Asia responsibility so I could, quote unquote, just have North America, because I thought the travel would be a lot better. And surprisingly, he said no to that. And so I decided I was going to leave the automotive industry and try to get into something that I could travel less. Well, here was the kind of, this will sound really stupid to you, but at the time, it didn't seem stupid, because remember, this was still 1999, and remember how money was free, and everybody was rushing to the internet, and complete morons were making millions of dollars. So I thought, I'm a moron, I can make millions of dollars. So I took a CEO job with Greenlight.com. I was recruited. It was Amazon's car tab. So Jeff Bezos was on our board. It was, if you went to Amazon at the time and wanted to buy a car, that was our company. Well, it was a big move to go from Saab to take this job. But I thought, I know startups are hard, but at least I won't travel international. At least I'll come home at night and sleep in the same bed as my wife and try to repair things. And of course, I was greedy too. I wanted the upside. I wanted the millions of dollars that the stock was going to be worth. And I'm not going to pretend there wasn't greed involved. But the main thing was the lifestyle. Well, to make a long story short, I went out to California. My family was going to come out after school was done. My first week of work is when the NASDAQ crashed. Literally, my first week of work. So I go out. I think we have $50 million that's going to close in 2 weeks. That's going to fund us for the next 3 years. The NASDAQ crashes. That funding gets pulled. What I thought was a 3-year runway to get the company profitable and go public was now a 90-day runway before we ran out of cash. So by the time my second week of work was completed, I had to lay off 75% of the workforce. And it just started this spiral downward for me, where I thought, I have given up everything professionally. I've worked my tail off ever since I got out of graduate school. I'm living by myself in California, and this company is going down. And we got 90 days, and it's going to be almost impossible to raise the cash. So I called Marky. I asked her to take our home off the market in Atlanta, and I was going to do what I could. But honestly, I went into an emotional downward spiral. I thought, what am I going to do? I can't go back to the auto industry because I know the lifestyle will kill our marriage. This company is not going to make it. And I fell into a depression. I started drinking too much just to sleep at night. I didn't know how else I was so wired, and it was just 24/7 kind of work. I was under so much pressure that, unfortunately, and depression runs in our family, my mother had it, I fell into that, and at the darkest moments, I thought about getting out of life itself. But I knew what that would do to my family. I didn't want to be that selfish, but I was at that point. And I thought, I just don't know how to be successful in business and have a home life. And two things happened that I want to share with you that I think might be helpful if any of you have had anything like this going on in your life, because as you know, running your business takes a full commitment. So a couple of things happened. The first thing was that same week, Jack Herschend called me. And Jack is the owner of the company that I talked about last night. And he offered me a chance to be non-executive chairman of the board of Herschend. I was on the board already, and it was a complete shock to me. And that's a whole different story of just how Jack recruited me. But that was amazing. And it gave me an opportunity, it gave me a light at the end of the tunnel. But what I want to share with you is the talk I heard when I went back to Atlanta. And I was just coming home for the weekend, and we go to a church called North Point Community Church. And Andy Stanley is our pastor. Anybody heard of Andy? I'm just curious. So a lot of you have. You know how great of a communicator this man is. And he did a sermon called Choosing to Cheat. And I have asked his permission to use that title. These are not my thoughts, these are Andy's. But I want to share with you a paraphrase of what he talked about, because the principles are so powerful. And then I'm going to share with you the three things that Marky and I did to try to get our marriage back in order and try to get that life balance back in order. But the first principle of Andy's talk is basically, you will cheat something every day you wake up. You know, these beer commercials that you can have it all, it's a total farce. You know, that is absolutely false advertising. You cannot have it all. And I know these principles are not necessarily rocket science, but absorbing their reality and being willing to do something about it is the hard part. You cannot spend all the time that your kids want you to spend with them when they're under 12, right? Now, when they're over 12, you can't get them to spend any time with you. But how many of you have young kids? I'm just curious. So anybody relevant to that? Yeah, so about half of you. That's great. You cannot spend enough time with your kids. You cannot spend enough time working out like you want to work out. You cannot spend all the time you want to spend at work to close every deal, to follow up on every lead. You can't spend all the time you'd love to spend with your friends. You can't spend all the time you'd love to spend with your spouse. The fact is, there's only 24 hours a day. You're going to cheat something. So, again, not rocket science, but that's the fact. You're going to cheat something every day. So the question isn't, are you going to cheat? The question is, who or whom are you going to cheat? And only you can make that decision. So the second principle that Andy talked about is most of us choose to cheat our home life. Most, and it's men and women, so this is cross genders. Most of us who work cheat our home life. And there's a lot of reasons for that all of us know, you know. Work calls out to us. Work has measurable achievement. You hit a goal, you get a bonus. You hit this number, you get to take home this much. Whatever. You get awards if you're in sales. Let's face it, at home, that just doesn't happen. You know, at work, you're making decisions, you're leading things, and you come home, and you know you're cleaning up your child's throw up at night, or your dog's pooped in the yard, and you got to clean it up, and it's like, it just changes, and you don't get the same gratification. I think that's part of the reason. And you're also trying to keep a business afloat. So those are really tough issues to deal with. But all that time, those of us who are working, if there's a non-working spouse, we're asking that spouse to carry a rock. And actually, when Andy did this, he had a rock and he held it the whole time he was talking on stage. That the pressure of taking care of the kids, making all those decisions on your own, because I was always gone and Marky was making all these decisions on her own. I wasn't even there to really help guide her through. We're asking them to hold a rock when we're always working. And at some point, that rock will drop. But it's a weight. It's a weight that people and spouses aren't really meant to carry on their own. So that's the second principle, is if we cheat family, we're forcing our spouse to hold that rock over time. And then the third principle, which I've kind of already said, is at some point, that rock will drop. And again, this has nothing to do with how you feel. It has everything to do about your behavior. If you are like I was, I felt like I loved my family. They were number one to me. In my heart, my family was number one. But my behavior did not show that. My behavior said to Marky she was not as important. My work was more important because I would always choose to take that as a priority. My kids didn't feel like they were a priority because of my actions. So you may not be resonating with this because you're thinking, well, I love my family is number one with me. But think about your behavior. What does your behavior say to your spouse? Andy said that you cannot give to the marketplace what is meant for the home. And there was, when he gave that talk, I knew that I had to make changes. As a matter of fact, that when he said that, and he said the line, there's only one person who can be your spouse's, there's only one person who can be Marky's husband. There's only one person who can be Aaron and Lauren and Jesse and Anna's father, and those are our 4 girls. And that was me. And Andy's talk hit me so hard. I did not want to go that morning. We came in late. We sat at the very back of this church, and it's a huge church, 5,000 people in this audience. I'm in the very back. And I felt like Andy was standing right on top of me, like yelling at me. And I looked over, and Marky was bawling her eyes out. And what was worse, it was Mother's Day. Her mother was down sitting with her, and her mother was bawling her eyes out. So I had my mother-in-law and my wife both crying, which made me feel about that big, but I deserved it. But I knew something drastic had to change. And so I want to share with you at least what Marky and I did about it. This isn't rocket science, but it is hard to do. The first point is to decide to stop cheating before you know the outcome. And I can speak for men because I am one. We have a great way of trying to predict what's going to happen. And I remember going through the thought process. Well, if I work less, then I won't be as successful, and maybe I won't get a promotion, or maybe I'll get fired. Or if I don't work overseas, the Asian operation won't turn around, or green light won't turn around, and I'll get in trouble, and who knows what happens then. So we project out what's going to happen in our mind, which is completely against what God asks us to do. God asks us to follow His principles and trust that He'll take care of the outcome. And I had this one breakfast with Andy that was so powerful to me, because at that time I was running Saab North America. And I was talking through Andy some of the struggles I was having with work-life balance. And Andy said, Joel, do you think that you got this Saab job on your own? And I said, no, it was totally a God thing. At my age and the people that were also going up for this job, I think God wanted me here. And he said, okay, I buy that. Do you think God wants you to work in a way that's going to destroy your marriage and have you be less than the father you're asked to be in Ephesians? Because if you read Ephesians, it's very clear. We're to love our wives as Christ loved the church. That's a pretty darn high standard. And it also says, do not exasperate your children. And if you read, it is pretty clear outline that we're to love our wives and love our kids. And I said, no, I don't think God calls me to do that. He goes, okay, then you got to let that go. You have to trust God. So the first point is, don't try to project what's going to happen. Just make up your mind you're going to stop cheating, that you're going to behave in a way that matches your heart. And it's a decision you have to make before you know the consequences. I know that sounds easy, but it's not. That's the hard part, because we all want to project out. And then the second thing we did, that was also advice from Andy, was to develop a plan to stop cheating. And now this is going to sound really weird, and it probably was. But we went to a 3-day weekend, and I brought a flip chart. So I brought a flip chart to an intimate 3-day weekend in a nice hotel. So that just tells you what kind of person I am. But we tried to make it nice and intimate. We went on walks. But on the flip chart, I asked Marky, what would it take to be the kind of husband and father that she had signed up for? Because I never forgot those words that she said over the phone when I called from Tokyo. This is not what I signed up for. And if you, men, I promise you, if you do this with your wives, or wives, if you do this with your husbands, if you're the culprit, you'll be surprised at the answers. And as a slight tangent, I'm talking a little bit more from a guy's perspective, obviously, but as a tangent, and in Andy's sermon, he went through it in detail, wives who are stay-at-home moms or working in the workforce, either way, can be just as guilty of this. Kids take the priority over the husband sometimes, and even though you say your husband's important, all your actions say the kids are more important. And that can drive a husband to spend more time at work. Or if you're working and you're trying to balance home and full-time work out of the home, which I don't know how in the world women do that, because just being a full-time mom is impossible. It's all the same issues, but I'm, of course, talking more from my own experience. So I asked Marky those questions. What's it going to take to be the husband you thought and the father? And what I got back really surprised me. And most of it was pretty easy. And if you don't mind, I'll just tell you what we worked through. If I was in town, she wanted me home by 6:30 so I could have dinner with the family. And between dinner and bedtime, don't get on that stupid smartphone and don't have it going during dinner, and really focus on her and the kids and not have my head down on the texting. And you know what? It just takes a little discipline to turn that thing off. And if I want to, and stop, the third thing was stop sending kids to bed, but start putting them to bed. And go up and spend time with my kids. And those of you who do that, you know that's when the magic happens. If you just sit with them for a while, they start asking those questions. You know, why does God do this? Or why does this happen? And I started asking my kids questions like, were you hurt in school today? Did anybody do something to you that hurt your feelings? How are you feeling? And my daughters, they're all girls, started to open up more. And that was a tremendous piece of advice from Marky. Put your kids to bed, don't send them to bed. Acts of service are her love language. So when she cooked, she wanted me to clean. That's not that hard to do. And I found that I really liked it because it gave me some feeling of accomplishment. After a rough day at work, I actually got something done. But the hardest thing, and the one that did take a huge decision, was she said, I can't handle the constant travel. And we worked out together a limit of 35% or less. Now that one, I could not stay as a senior executive in the auto industry, and I felt I couldn't do that job and stay in the auto and only travel 35% or less, because it's just an international company all over the world. That's just not going to happen. Luckily for me, and it was not luck, it was God, a God story, Jack Herschend's offer fit exactly with what Marky and I had worked out. It was a domestic company. I was going to be able to travel 35% or less and still get to all the properties. And it was not an easy decision to go to Herschend, because honestly, the non-executive chairman role, it was not full-time. It paid a third of what I was making at Greenlight. So it was not just this easy decision. But we decided to follow the principles that we had worked out on that 3-day weekend and take this chance. Did I forget anything else on the list? I don't have them written down, but I get the main ones. But you get the idea. Your list obviously going to be different, but it wasn't stuff that was impossible. And to this day, it's been almost 15 years now. That list, we do those things and still do them today. So the main point is develop a plan to stop cheating and stick to it, and basically have an agreement with your spouse of what does it look like when I'm not cheating. And you'll always have that in your memory, and you'll always go back to that. So have a plan. And then the third principle is to take action. And it was one thing to go off on the weekend and come up with this list on the flip chart, but it was another thing to actually make the decision. I did decide to go to Herschend, and everything completely worked out. About 3.5, 4 years after I got there as non-executive chairman, eventually became CEO because of a whole other set of circumstances, and things kind of took care of themselves. But that little period of time when I was non-executive chairman and I had some capacity and some time, it's when I really reconnected again with our family, and it was great. And for that first, from graduate school in 85 until 2000, that 15-year period when I moved 10 times and it was on that constant treadmill, all I can tell you is I always felt like I was missing something. I was searching for something. And I kept taking this next move, searching, because it just wasn't right. And ever since I've been at Herschend and I've been following these principles at home, but also the principles of love that I shared last night, I have this contentment when I get these phone calls of other opportunities, I just don't even go there. I don't even want, I appreciate the phone call, but I am happy where I am. And maybe I could have made more money elsewhere, perhaps, but I don't care. I am so happy doing what I'm doing. I feel a contentment that I can tell you from that standpoint, it is really, really worth it. But it took an act of faith, at least for me, to take a 2/3 pay cut. And I'm a little embarrassed to admit that, but I grew up in a very, very humble, poor, if you want to call it, environment. Money was a huge issue in our home because we never had any of it. My dad, for about 3 years, when his business was going under, a farm machinery dealership, my mom told me later he would bring home about $50 a week for about a 3-year period. And even in the mid-60s, $2,000 a year is not a lot of money. And I remember clearly the issues that money caused in our house and the lack thereof. So I was always very motivated by that, and I'm not proud to admit that. But so for me, it took a lot of faith to make that move to Herschend. But I'll tell you, God has just blessed us in ways that has been incredible. So what I encourage you to do is take that move of faith. Even if you have this sit down with your spouse and you come up with a plan, it's going to take some action of faith. But if you look at the Bible, and there's so many examples, and I'm not going to bore you with a lot of details, but you think about in the Bible, 3 key ones. When Jesus asked Peter to walk on water, Peter had to have faith first, and then he went out and walked on water. When God asked Noah to build the ark, he had to have faith to build the ark first before it started to rain, right? Or when Joseph was asked to do what he was asked to do, he had to have faith, and he went through some terrible, terrible tragedies in his life before God raised him up in Egypt. So the faith comes first, and then the rewards from God come second. So I know that's hard because you take chances, and for us it was hard to cut our income that much and make it, but it worked out fine for us. So I encourage you to take action. I want to take you, I'm going to take you back to a story that proves this point. It was 2000, year 2000, and Marky and I and our 3 girls flew over to Guangzhou, China. And we were going over to adopt a little baby girl. And we went into this orphanage, and you see all these kids that are looking for homes. It just breaks your heart because there's hundreds of them. But we got to this special room in our hotel, and they brought us little Annie, and it was just this incredibly special moment. But Annie was malnutritioned, and she had rickets, and so we had to get her the right nourishment. But because of that, when we brought her back to the States, Annie would always clench her fists. And she would always take the food that we gave her, and she would clench it in both fists like this. And we always fed her Cheerios in the morning. So she would keep Cheerios in her hands all day, and she would nibble at them like this, and just release it a little bit at a time. And of course that worried us because it was not correct behavior, but it was a result of being in that orphanage and never having enough. And she must have been weak or just didn't win the battle in the orphanage. And I remember one time I was giving Annie a bath. So at the end of the full day, she still had her breakfast Cheerios clenched in her fist. And she got her hands in the water, and she started making the Cheerios all soggy. I said, Annie, stop doing that. And so I started prying her fingers and trying to get at those Cheerios, and she would just scream, absolutely scream bloody murder that I was taking these Cheerios out of her hands. I said, Annie, if you would just let go and let go of these Cheerios, I have so much more for you. We're going to protect you. We're going to honor you. We're going to love you. You don't have to worry about these little nothing Cheerios. And I told that story to this teacher who was living in our basement at the time. We were just trying to help her out. And she said, you know, Joel, that's a good analogy of what you went through in your own life, because she knew my own story. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. She was exactly right. You know, I had been clenching on to all this stuff that's completely meaningless in God's economy. My income, afraid of failure, because that's really what it is. You know, was it really, I wasn't really worried that I could find employment for my family. I didn't want to fail in my job, so you work out of fear of failure and all these emotions that are keeping you from spending more time with your family. And when I finally, at a low moment in that apartment complex in Northern California by myself working for Greenlight, when I reached that low moment and I heard Andy's story and I went off with Marky and we had that weekend, I was finally able to let go of my own Cheerios, so to speak, and let God bless our lives like He really wanted to do. So for us, it had a great ending. It doesn't necessarily always go that way, I suppose, but I think it starts with faith, and it starts with letting God move in your life.
Well, thank you for joining us on this episode of FCCI's Pathway to Purpose podcast. Today's story reminded us that true success isn't just about professional achievements, it's about honoring God, cherishing family, and living with intentionality. If this episode resonated with you, please subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an inspiring story or practical insight. Share this episode with a friend who might need encouragement in their own journey. And don't forget to leave us a review. It helps us reach more listeners like you. Well, next week we'll continue by diving into strategies for integrating faith into your leadership decisions. You don't want to miss it. Until then, stay faithful, stay purposeful, and keep building for His kingdom.